So I try to play games on this MacBook right here, and well, here's the proof. Yep, there it is. For those uninitiated or don't understand, many games on the computer use the WASD keys with the fingers positioned like such to move a character. To move backwards, you would have to move your middle finger backwards like this. Your fingers also generates oils and sweats, so when you're basically rubbing that onto the key, it could be abrasive to the paint and wear it off. Anyways, I love playing games, and actually the first games I played were on a Mac. However, throughout my life I've had some handhelds and consoles, each worthy of their own story for a video. Eventually time came to get a laptop for college, so naturally I chose a non-gaming laptop. I mean, try convincing your parents that you're only gonna use this to read and type. There are plenty of other reasons why I got a Mac though. I like their design, how light they are, their integration with other Apple devices, their intuitive controls and UI, how good it is for editing, and how it came with free beats. And oh boy, am I glad they were free because mine broke immediately after their warranty expired. But I just had to go to school during the time when Apple made their worst laptops ever. I even went out of the way to avoid the one with a touch bar because I knew it would be useless and not worth the expenses. And yet, with this laptop, the keys and trackpad don't even depress, and that depresses me. There are only 2 USB-C ports, but really there's just one because the other one's reserved for charging. So I have to buy a bunch of stupid dongles and adapters. And the fans become a jet engine just from me turning on Google Chrome. These problems suck in general, but they're exacerbated while gaming because, well, the keys hurt your fingers after a while, and I'm limited by my accessory use, and the fans get really annoying. This is the least ideal device to play games on, but I tried regardless. There were some games unavailable on the consoles I had at the time, and I wanted to play with my friends. With desperation came the 3 ways I try to play games on my MacBook. So if you're ever in a similar situation, or just curious, perhaps you can learn from my mistakes. Part 1. Natively. Naturally, when I got my brand new Mac, I wanted to test out its limits by finding a game to play on it. The App Store has a modicum of games for the Mac, but don't fret as I was not naive enough to actually purchase games from the App Store. Instead, I downloaded Steam and found their catalog of games that supported macOS. Their library is much more expensive, there are frequent sales with massive discounts, and I could keep the games if I do eventually buy a PC. And so, the first game I tried was Super Hot. The game worked fine and I beat it the first day I bought it. Not only that, but I actually did not have a mouse at the time, so I beat the game using a trackpad. The game was simple enough to where I didn't need a mouse. Time moves only when I move, and all I needed to do was aim and click. I eventually got a mouse. And I went on to get more games like Minecraft, Portal, Undertale, and the Jackbox games. I even played Fortnite back when the Battle Royale mode first came out. There are plenty of reasons for why I tried. It was free, it was one of the few games that supported Mac, and some of my friends wanted to try as well. However, this game really did not work on my Mac. Even on the lowest settings, the game ran at like 10 frames per second. It was not an enjoyable experience. However, my friends felt the same even though the game worked fine on their machines, so it was pretty bare bones back then. So not only was the selection of games playable on Mac limited, but my ability to play some games were further limited by how weak my Mac was, even though it was a MacBook Pro. Not only that, but updating my Mac to macOS Monterey now prevents me from playing some older games, curtailing my library even more. So, some advice I could give for playing natively would be to, first, buy a mouse, a keyboard even. You could also try an Xbox controller since it works wirelessly. Next, buy your games from Steam and the Epic Game Store. You'll find more games and they have many sales, many features, allow better multiplayer, and if you do get a game PC later on, you can still play these games. I'd be wary of some of the games I'd buy though, as some of them might not perform well or just not work at all. But apparently the newest MacBook Air could play Resident Evil Village with the M2 chip, so performance might not be an issue, but there are still many less demanding games that are totally worth playing. However, you will trade off the ability to play some 32-bit games like Half-Life 2 and Portal 2, some of the best games ever made. Hopefully these games will be supported later, but for now there isn't much option to play some 32-bit games with a new Mac. However, some of these issues can be circumvented by the next two methods for which I try to play games on my Mac. Part 2. Streaming. I came across an advert that showed what looked like a MacBook playing some games like PUBG, Overwatch, and Rainbow Six Siege. I knew that these games could not run on a Mac, so how could this be? It was for a service called NVIDIA GeForce Now. Through low latency streaming, I was able to basically control a gaming computer far away, while the computer would use my screen as its monitor. Having known of NVIDIA and the service being in beta for free, I signed up. Eventually I was accepted into the beta, and now I could play so many more games with my MacBook, and even play with my friends on PC. However, then came many caveats. A fast internet connection is required, as with slow internet come lag and quality drops. But the college I was in at the time had super fast internet, so that wasn't an issue, at least not for now. The next caveat was that the games playable on GeForce Now were not all free. It's not like Netflix where every movie you see you can watch. You actually have to own the game first on Steam, Epic, or wherever. However, this is actually a good thing, which I'll explain later on. Since the games I already own worked fine on my Mac, there was no need to stream them other than testing if the service worked. I continued my testing by borrowing my friend's account so that I might try out two games, Overwatch and Rainbow Six Siege. These were the games I played on console before, but with GeForce Now, I get to play with my friends and get the true experience of each game. I eventually got both games on sale and played them both a lot on my Mac. Of course, it was not perfect. Occasionally I would lag out and my inputs or screen would be delayed. I'd sometimes not realize that I was already dead. I also set it so that I would sacrifice quality for better latencies, so my screen would get blurry sometimes. Of the two, I got into Siege more, but this is probably the worst way to play, as every single frame and pixel in that game is life or death. You know how the Romans would train with heavier swords than they would in combat? I was adequate enough at Siege at the worst conditions, so maybe if I got my hands on a gaming computer, I'd be like an esports pro, the next Macy J, or maybe even T-Pain. The final caveat was that it was a service in the end, meaning that there would be queues, time limits, and monthly payments eventually for the premium tier. During the beta, I only really had to worry about waiting for queues since Siege and Overwatch were popular on the service. The service finally opened up to the public on February 2020. I stopped using the service after a while, even though they gave me 3 free months of their premium tier for being a beta tester. I had to move back to Japan to my family because of... And it didn't work out at all while I stayed there, so that was basically the end of my time with GeForce Now. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about GeForce Now as that's the service I have the most experience with, but there are other video game streaming services like Google Stadia, Amazon Luna, and Xbox Game Pass. I actually also tested for Stadia when it was called Project Steam, where I got to play Assassin's Creed Odyssey for free through streaming. Google Stadia shares much of the same caveats. It requires as fast internet, you have to buy the games, and you also have to pay monthly for the service. However, the service is so confusing. You can demo Stadia without signing up, and then you can create an account to play Destiny 2 for free. But then you have to buy the rest of the games from Stadia itself, not Steam or other places. That means if you buy a game from Stadia, you can only play on Stadia and only through streaming it. Then you can upgrade to Stadia Pro to get a smattering of free games and discounts on others. Then there's Luna, which I only found out exists after searching for Stadia. Luna is also confusing with its pricing, so if you have Prime, you can play 5 games for free. Then there's multiple channels you have to pay individually for that bundles games together, like Luna Plus and the Jackbox games, which is honestly actually a great deal. But there's no tier to have everything, which is odd to me. There is Twitch integration though, which is pretty cool. Finally, there's Game Pass Ultimate, which is like the best deal in gaming. I already use it since I got my rinky-dink Xbox One, but apparently I can stream games onto my laptop that would actually look better than my 8-year-old console. You don't even need an Xbox to play Xbox games. If you have Game Pass Ultimate, you can stream it, and everything you see on the cloud gaming page, you can play. And this is the most impressive catalog for streaming, even compared to GeForce Now, as you don't even need to buy each individual game. However, the biggest catch is that you can only play with a wireless controller, no mouse and keyboard support, at least not yet. However, macOS supports many controllers. Like, this is pure blasphemy. I recommend GeForce Now and Game Pass if you want to stream, just be wary of the caveats. Test if your Wi-Fi is good enough, and know that it will not be perfect. There are also plenty more streaming services on the horizon, so you could try to find some others. However, if streaming is not for you, then there's one final option I found to play PC games on a Mac. Part 3. BootCamp. I remember walking through my dorm and I passed by a girl that had a MacBook, but her screen made me do a double take. It looked like a Windows desktop, so I checked her laptop and confirmed it was a MacBook. I asked her how she did that, and then she told me about BootCamp Assistant, how it converted her Mac into a fully functioning PC. She also demonstrated how she could revert back to Mac as well. I thought it was cool, but I didn't have much of a reason to convert. At least, not yet. Some years came and there was one game that really intrigued me that got a PC port. I waited to see if the game would be available on GeForce Now, but even still today, it's not. I checked the store page and saw the minimum specs, and reasoned that my Mac could handle it. I then remembered about BootCamp and made my way to converting my Mac. One thing to note about BootCamp is that it's only available for Intel-based Macs like mine. All of the newer Macs now use Apple Silicon like the M1 chip. And honestly, these chips are the reason you get a Mac. They're extremely powerful. There are ways to convert M1 Macs to PCs, but it requires some external software and some great hoops to jump through that I will not explore. Regardless, I still had plenty of issues when it came to converting my Mac to a Windows PC. First issue was that I would have to sacrifice hard drive space to make room for Windows. I decided to partition the minimum amount, which was 40 gigabytes. However, this was a grave mistake. Windows OS takes up around 20 gigabytes, but then I had to download some updates, which now left me with 10 gigabytes. There was also the issue that I needed a Windows license key, since this isn't a Windows PC. Thankfully, my school provided keys for students for free, so I avoided having to pay hundreds of dollars. With that, I finally converted my Mac into a PC, giving me the chance to finally play this one game. I immediately went to download the Epic Game Store, put in my credit card info, buy the game, and wait for the 5 gigabytes to download. With that, I could finally play Tetris Effect, a game that continually mocks me as now it's available on every console I own. I even both got and lost a PS4 a few months after buying the game, but that's a story for another time. And the game barely worked. I lowered all the settings and the game ran at like 30 frames per second. There was actually one level that ran at 60 FPS, but then came some levels that became a literal slideshow. The game was physically hard for me to beat because it became a PowerPoint presentation. I mean, look at this. This is ridiculous. I was happy to play, but the quality of it definitely dampened my experience. Occasionally, Windows would crash and blue screen whenever I booted it up, relating to something about updating but there not being enough space. With the experience not being worthwhile, I just reverted my Mac to just purely being a Mac. I would have liked to play more games that would have worked on my Mac, like Power Wash Simulator or Inscription, but I gave up on my ambitions and much rather save up money to buy a proper gaming PC. Or build. I don't know which is better at this point. Advice can be tricky for BootCamp as it isn't available for current Macs. There are alternative ways to convert or even emulate Windows, but that's really shoddy to do so. I really would not recommend converting your Mac in general, but if you must insist, make sure you back up your data, partition your half your space or reserve 100 gigabytes, and have a license key for Windows 10, specifically Windows 10. So that was how I tried to play games on a Mac. They're definitely not ideal for gaming, despite how much Apple might advertise now. Even with all of this, I still don't regret having a Mac, albeit maybe this Mac in particular, but I still enjoyed it for all the reasons I mentioned at the start, and using it for work and study was great. Only rarely would I play games on my Mac. I mean, even I'm guilty of backlogging games from Steam sales. So, should you get a Mac for games? Absolutely not. Should you get a Mac? That's a different question. It depends on your priorities, whether you want to work hard or play hard. If you have a Mac and want to play games, I recommend just buying a Nintendo Switch or Xbox Series S, as both are relatively cheap and easier to find. However, if neither of those are attractive, then you can try streaming. The tech is getting better day by day, and that's the best method I recommend for gaming on a MacBook. With all that I've done right now, I'm just saving up money to buy a gaming PC. I've come to realize that it really is the best way to play some games, even for the games I already owned. However, there is now another game that has eluded me that I want to play. No other version would suffice. I need to play this game in its full graphical detail, to play with other friends on PC, to feel its smooth, buzzery gameplay, to use its unmatched support on mouse and keyboard. I need a full gaming PC for this game. I am now working all of my earnings into being able to just play one game in its full glory on PC. And that game is Among Us. Hey, thanks for watching. This is kind of my debut video, I guess, for this channel, and I plan to definitely make more videos like this. I had a bunch of fun making this video, and I hope to do some more. I mean, you already know what to do if you like the video, if you're like me, right? You don't need another person just screaming at you. Regardless, just thank you for watching.